Humanity has always been an outgoing species, exploring and discovering new and uncharted places since the dawn of our kind. It has always been in our nature to be curious about what's out there. Humans started in what is now Africa and spread out to the Middle East and Asia at least 60,000 years ago, then to Australia and the Pacific Islands 12,000 years after that. Another 8,000 years later, we migrated out to Europe and finally to the Americas 7,000 years later. By that point, our species had expanded to every continent on Earth other than Antarctica, and fast forward to today, we have a good understanding of Earth's geography, including each of the 2,000 islands located in the middle of the ocean. Eventually, we realized that the Earth is not infinite, and after leaving our mark on every ocean, rainforest, mountain range, and piece of land left to discover, we looked to the stars for our next endeavor. The first man-made object ever put into space was Sputnik 1. It was a small satellite launched by the Soviet Union in 1957. Sputnik was followed by 22 other missions from the Soviet Union in the United States until 1961, when the first human ever went to space, a Soviet cosmonaut named Yuri Gagarin. This was huge for space agencies around the world, but a defeat to the United States, and only 5 weeks later, President John F. Kennedy announced that America had a new, more ambitious goal: to go to the moon, which kicked off the space race for both nations. The space race was the most progressive thing humanity was determined to do at the time, and only 8 years after it was announced, on July 20th, 1969, the famous Apollo 11 mission launched, placing humanity on the moon for the very first time. And Neil Armstrong uttered the famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." At the time, the words never rang more true, and 5 more missions followed the success of Apollo 11. But since 1972, we haven't been back to the moon. In fact, humans haven't even left low Earth orbit for over 50 years. But this will all change with NASA's new Artemis program, with the optimistic goal to have a permanent moon base on the lunar South Pole by 2024. And with help from Russia and China to create a space station around the moon, its due date is beginning to look pretty promising. It will start off with scientists and researchers, but when more countries get interested and excited about it, eventually we could have bases grow to towns, then to cities, and sooner than we may think we could have millions of people living their regular lives on the moon. But let's take a step back. What more down-to-earth goals do we have? On October 31st, 2021, the long-awaited James Webb Space Telescope is scheduled to launch. The telescope will be over 100 times more powerful than the famous Hubble telescope, and if we look back into how amazing and mind-blowing Hubble was, we can only imagine what we'll learn. The telescope will be able to look back into the earliest and furthest away galaxies, and could observe the atmospheres of exoplanets better than ever. Aside from James Webb, the Parker Solar Probe, which launched in 2018 to observe the outer corona of the Sun, will in 2024 get the closest to the Sun it has ever been, only 6.1 million kilometers away, and simultaneously reach the fastest speed a man-made object has ever reached, a whopping 692,000 kilometers per hour. Next up, the OSIRIS-REx probe is bringing back a sample from an asteroid called Bennu. The asteroid was heavily researched because it is well over 4 billion years old, and may clue us into what was happening in the earliest days of the solar system. On top of that, the asteroid contains organic molecules, volatiles, and amino acids that could have been the key to life as we know it starting on Earth. OSIRIS-REx launched in 2018 and will return home with its sample from Bennu in 2023, and give us the best look into the past we have ever had of our solar system. By 2026, we plan to launch a drone called the Dragonfly to Saturn's moon Titan. It will give us our first look back on the surface since the success of the Cassini-Huygens mission in 2005. The drone will give us our first real aerial view of Titan, and possibly a few decades down the line after Dragonfly, we may send a submarine into Titan's methane lakes, and will be the first alien ocean we ever explore. Government-run space agencies have done the most successful advancements since the beginning of the space age. But this is all changing with the introduction of private companies to the space industry, most notably SpaceX. Looking back, SpaceX has caught up to and even surpassed NASA in the advancement of technologies. For example, SpaceX was the first private company to launch a liquid-fueled rocket into orbit and recover it. They were the first private company to send a spacecraft to the ISS, first to send a satellite into orbit, and send a probe beyond Earth orbit, and as of 2021, developed the most powerful rocket in operation, the Falcon Heavy. And even with all of this success, they are still looking to be the first space agency to ever land a crew on Mars. Beyond this, SpaceX is testing the new most powerful launch vehicle, the Starship. It is designed to be able to take us to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. The rocket is 120 meters tall and 9 meters wide, and is going to be able to carry 100 tons of material to Earth's orbit. It is made up of two parts, the Starship itself, where the crew will stay, and the super heavy booster. The part the crew stays in only takes up about a third of the ship, and the rest is for fuel. Sounds pretty impressive, right? Well, on top of all of that, both stages of the rocket are reusable. Not only is the Starship the greatest rocket ever built, it will also be the most cost efficient. Instead of having to start from scratch after every launch like what we had to deal with during Apollo, we just need to grab the fuel tank that landed safely somewhere in the ocean on a launch pad, attach it to a new Starship, and it's back in business. This is game-changing for the space industry, where the cost of putting something in space is one of the main drawbacks. The plan for Mars is to drop off supplies for a crew in 2022 and launch the crew to the Red Planet in 2024. The delay is due to Mars's orbit around the Sun, where only every 2 years Earth and Mars reach their closest points to each other, opening a launch window that's worth taking. The journey to Mars is probably going to be the hardest thing we have ever done as a species, but we're good at doing hard stuff. Every problem we have come across, we have came up with a solution for it. And now look at us, with real ambitions to visit a whole other planet. There are lots of things to look forward to in the future, and even if it's a struggle to get there, it'll all be worth it in the end.